Okay. So, my first move in doing all of this is to, again, for me, the shortcut to only select just the name without the extension is just to hit the Enter key or the Return key. And then, again, Command-C will do the copy of this, or up to the Edit menu down to Copy, either one. They both work. So now I've just copied the name of this thing to my clipboard, and that part's great. I'm then going to just double-click on this guy. I'm not going to double-click on, I'm not going to grab them both right now. I'm just going to click on this first one. It will open up in Camera Raw, and my first move in this is that I want to make a DNG about from this. Now, you don't need to do white balancing in this. You don't need to do any color correction in this, because the DNG that we are going to create, we need a DNG in order to make a custom profile, but that DNG is a raw file, so all the adjustments that you would make on this thing are moot. It doesn't matter. So, but I want to show you what the XMP file is about and the reason that those things exist. So here's the thing. When Adobe, and Adobe was the people, Adobe it not only was, still is, the people who have driven all of this. When digital first became something, when digital capture first became something, there was this big push to have everybody adopt it. And it was like, okay, digital's the future, we're going to get rid of film, we're going to do all that kind of stuff, whatever. And here, this is what it looks like, this is how it works, all that kind of stuff, right? And Adobe wanted everybody in the world to adopt this. And the wall that they hit was the police departments. And police departments came back to them and said, we're not going to use digital files because it's too easy to manipulate a file. It's too easy for me to put my head on Paige's body and say that, oh, that person committed the murder, right? It's too easy to do that. And so Adobe said to them, look, we'll make this foolproof for you. What we will do is we will make it such that if anybody goes in and touches any part of the code of a raw file, that it self-destructs. So if you go into a raw file, so I always ask this, can anybody here name me a piece of software that will edit a raw file? We have Photoshop, a lot of people say Lightroom, a lot of people would say Camera Raw, a lot of people would say Bibble, Capture One, all that. None of them will do that. You cannot edit a raw file. You can process a raw file, but you cannot go in and edit the file. You cannot go in, you cannot open that file up and go into its insides and actually make any changes without destroying the file. And that's how they got around the whole police thing. But the problem with that then now is that, well, I want to process this file and I want it to all stay together. But you can't write into the file. The file is sacrosanct. You cannot go in there and change a raw file. So the solution to that was to create what they call an XMP file. A lot of people will refer to it also as a sidecar file. And what it is it's a text file that sits right next to the file the image file that it's about. And it's the recipe of what you've done. Does that sort of make sense to everybody? So to show you what that really means, I'm going to actually ask everybody to do this. If everybody's got this thing open, I want you to just take the exposure slider and drag it all the way down to minus, in my case it goes down to -5 stops. Whatever your most minus is. In older versions of Photoshop it was -4 stops. But I just want you to go ahead and say that. So it makes it really dark, right? That's the only change we're going to make. And then just hit done. And then go out to your Finder or your desktop, wherever you are in Windows, and you'll see it's created this thing called an XMP file, and it's got the exact same name as my raw file. The only difference is the extension. My raw file is a CR2. This has got an XMP on the end of it. If you control-click, in most cases you could just double-click on this XMP. I'm not going to say don't do that. Instead, if you do it on Macintosh, a control-click, you'll get a drop-down menu and say Open With, and you are going to do Other. You want to open this in a text editor. If you're on a Windows machine, simply drag this thing on top of any text editor. It doesn't matter. In the Macintosh world, the easiest text editor to use is actually the Macintosh text editor. So if you go down into your applications thing, you can say text edit. I want you to go ahead and open this in a text editor. You can open it up in Microsoft Word. You can open it up there. You can open up in anything. This is what that XMP file looks like. And I know this is a little bit daunting right here, but don't let this flip you out too much. At the very top is all this information about the cameras that used it. This is all about a bunch of Adobe stuff. You can see in here, it was a Canon EOS 5D Mark II. The orientation, it'll say whether you're horizontal or vertical. It'll give you your exposure times. It will give you all of this stuff. As you continue to work your way down through all of this part, you will actually get to the processing version part of it all. And if you look somewhere down in the list, I've found mine right down in here, it says this right down here, CRS exposure 2012 equals -5. You remember how dark that whole thing was, that exposure slider was. That -5 was written to this XMP file. If you change this -5 to 0, and then save this file and close it up, and then double click on the XMP guy, on the regular RAW file again, you'll notice that it comes right back into Photoshop, right back into Camera Raw with an exposure value of 0 on here. So all the changes that you make in here are saved to this recipe, and that recipe is an XMP file. Does that make sense to everybody what's going on? So another quick one, the reason this is important, go ahead and drag it down all the way again to that -5, simply click on done, it'll close up, go back to your desktop finder, whatever it is, double click on the, don't make any change to the XMP, just double click on the CR2 file again. It's going to open up and you'll see it remembered that -5 in there. That part was great. I'm going to go cancel one more time to just get out of here. I'm going to go back down now to my Finder, and I'm going to grab this XMP file and I'm going to throw it away. And then double click on the CR2 again. And you'll notice when you come back in here, it resets to its normal because there was no XMP file. Think of that XMP file as the recipe for how you actually did your edit. Does this make sense, everyone? So if you want to keep this stuff, all together, you've got to keep the XMP file along with, the sidecar file has to be along with the RAW file. DNG skirts that issue. Now DNG is also a RAW file, but what DNG is, and it's, some people have an issue with this, but nonetheless, what it really is a folder. And it actually takes the RAW file and this sidecar file and it puts it into this folder and it presents the folder to you as if it's a single file, but it isn't. It's really a folder that's got all of these other things in it. That's why we can actually take a custom profile and actually embed it into a DNG, and then when we save that as a new starter file, it appears as if it's just a single file, but it'll actually contain all of these elements and issues inside of it. Does that sort of make sense? So that's the goal. That's what we're going to ultimately do here. That's why we're doing the whole DNG thing. Okay, so our first move is with this file open, we're going to make a DNG of it. And if you come up and you click on the little, if you look at the very top right part of your screen, there's a little box with an arrow in it that points down. If you click on that, it's just the fastest way to make a DNG of this. If you don't change anything in this, it will actually save it in the same location as your RAW file, which is what we want to do. So I'm just going to click on Save. If you do tons of these, you'll see there's a little progress bar in the lower left-hand side of your screen. If you do tons of, because you can do hundreds, thousands of these all at once. You don't need to do these one at a time. You'll get a little progress bar down along the bottom to make sure that you get to that point. In this case, and this is important to notice, we have got now our profile. We haven't built the custom profile yet. So our profile in here right now is this camera standard. There is no white balance on this, so the white balance is listed as shot. That's how I know that that's what I was looking at to make sure that, so I could make the distinction between the people who actually were color balancing their images as opposed to the people who weren't. The minute you do your own white balance on this image, that as shot changes to custom. So it's just a way to know. That's how I know who was white balancing and which. Some people did half of theirs white balance and not the other half. That's how I would know whether you did it or not. It's really actually very simple. But realize that the DNG that we just made has got these things embedded in it right now. That's not going to work for me. I actually need to have a DNG that has got the custom profile I have yet to create embedded in it. So that's what we're going to do next. So we've done all the work we can do on this for the time being. I'm going to go ahead and close that up and hit the done button so nothing else is changing. If you go then look, there's a DNG sitting right here. This is the one that we're actually going to do our work with. My computer's already getting glitchy, so hang on one second, guys. I'm just going to quit Chrome really fast and hopefully free up a few more resources. Okay. So the next move here is that we need to go to your applications folder. And again, there's two slightly different names. For the Macintosh people, the folder, the application that we're looking for here is the color checker camera calibration. And for the Windows people, it's something like camera calibration, color checker. I mean, it's just the same thing, but reverse the names. Can everybody, the Windows people, find the name of the file that their application that they're looking for? Anybody not? Okay, for the Macintosh people, color checker, camera calibration, go ahead and launch that. It'll open up, say, have you color calibrated your monitor yet? How many people in this room have still yet to color calibrate their laptops? Please don't raise your hand because it's just going to be really demoralizing to me. But just know, secretly, I know who you are. I'm going to come find you and I'm going to threaten to kill your family if you don't calibrate your, no, I'm not. Anyway, all right, so this is now opened up. It says you can either drag and drop the image here. If you have struggles finding the image to drag and drop, you can always go to the File menu and come down to Add Image, and then you can go through all of the dialog boxes that will allow you to do that. But in my case, I thought it would be easier, but in my case, it's right here, so I'm simply going to grab that DNG, drag it on top of this guy. It's loading the image. It'll go through the whole part of it. We've gone through this before, talked about this before. If it can't find the color target, the color checker in your image, you can use the controls on the side over here to actually move your image around and make sure that it's actually set up on there in the correct position. But mine is, if you need to adjust it slightly, you use the little green dots on the corners, allow you to sort of move it around. In our case, we're fine right here. You'll notice in this case, though, I should fire this assistant. No, actually, he's doing really well right now. You see that person's thumb, the guy who's actually holding this color checker, it's almost touching the green. That would be a huge mistake for two reasons. Number one, it puts a thumbprint on the green and the oils from your hand can actually change the color of that ultimately, and you don't want to do that. But the other thing is it'll fuck things like this up. It won't be able to find the target because you've covered part of the target. But anyway, in our case, we're fine here. I'm going to go ahead and click on Create Profile. You can do all this with me. When it gives me the chance to save this now, I want to give it the name of the image that I'm working on. Now you remember my very first step was to copy the name of that image. So it should be on here, and I should be in a Macintosh world be able to go Command V and it will paste the name in. In this case it doesn't. I also, if I don't come up here, I wanted to do the edit menu and do paste. It doesn't exist up there either. So the trick to this is that you can see the name is already selected, the DCP is not. But in our case, what I'm going to do is if on a Macintosh again, or anybody here, you need to do a control click. If you can do a control click, you'll get a drop-down menu. A control click means on a Macintosh, you hold down the control key and click your mouse and you'll actually get it. On Windows, if you have a 2-button mouse, you can use the right button. That's also a control click. And then finally, in a Macintosh world, the trackpad, if you use a 2-finger swipe down, you will also get a drop-down menu, but it's a contextual menu. I'm going to do control click on mine and just get a drop-down menu, and you'll see that the word paste now exists. This is the drop-down. So go ahead and click on paste, and it replaces that name. I still keep the .dcp, which is what I need to keep, but it replaces it with the name of my file. Now, You can leave the 001 in there, but you don't really need to because that was just the frame number. The real name of the entire session that I was shooting here is that date followed by CAR followed by fashion followed by 03. So I'm actually going to leave this my extension in here because I think I probably got, well, I can see right here. Yeah, I don't think, no, actually I do have one that's 03. So I'm going to leave my extension in there, the frame number in here, just to differentiate it from exactly one that I've already got in here. And I'm simply going to hit save.
What does the 03 mean?
So the 03, when I was actually, those are numbers that I use for outfits. So on this particular shooting, I was doing, I don't know, 10 different outfits, 7 or 8 different outfits. So the 03 separates that outfit. So this was the third one that I shot for that day, and everyone in there will have it. The only thing that would change within that whole shooting would be the frame numbers. And I don't know why this is taking so much longer. Again, every time the software updates, I would like to think that it actually is making more precise ones. But anyway, I'm getting an OK that's successfully done right now, so I'm going to say OK to that. I'm going to quit my color calibration, color checker, whatever the hell that thing. I'm going to quit all of that. It's already done its job. Now I'm actually back to my original thing that I was trying to make a custom profile of. However, the problem that I have with this right now is that this guy, this DNG, has that original setup in it where it said the original camera, the profile was not the custom one that I just built, it was just the Adobe camera profile that was in there. So this DNG is wrong for me to use as a starting point, so I'm going to throw it away, just get rid of it. And I'm going to start this whole process from scratch. Actually, it wasn't that DNG, it's this DNG right here. I'm going to get rid of this. So now all I have got, I can even get rid of my XMP file. I'm going to just start this whole process from scratch. I've built a custom profile. I've got my 2 raw files right here, my CR2 file that's actually got a color card in it that I'm going to use, and then the image that I want to apply this to. So the color card image is not my final image. The image that I need to submit to the client or use on my website or do whatever, blah, 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 is the other one. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay, so I'm going to open them both at the same time. So I've selected them both. I'm just going to hit Command O to open them or drag them on top of Photoshop or however you typically open a file, and they will both open up in Photoshop. Again, I've set my preferences to have my thumbnails on the left edge. By default, Photoshop does them, or Camera Raw does them along the bottom. You can change those in preferences if you want to get to that. It's the little gear that's right up here. Just click on that, go through the different preferences, and you can change this part right here. But the primary work that I'm going to do right now is on this file so that I can actually make this actually work for me. So I am going to first off start at the very top and work my way down. And at the very top, my first the first thing I'm going to hit in here is the custom profile. So in the profile drop down, you can either click on the drop down and go to browse, or you can click on the little profile, the browser, the finder for profiles. It's the little 4 icon. It's an icon that's got 3 little squares and a magnifying glass. If you click on that, it'll actually open you up into a separate panel that's just about profiles. If you scroll down in here, you'll see that there's a standard set that exists up in the top. But if you click the drop down for the word that says profiles, it will open up, and inside of that is where you will find the profile, the custom one that you just built. You can see I've got 3 of them in here, but it was the one that's got that 001 extension for me that I know is the correct profile for this. So I'm going to click on that. You'll notice that it puts it up in the very top, so you can say, yep, that's the one I want. If you then click on the back arrow, you will see that you're back into the basics panel, but you've now used the proper profile for this one particular lighting situation / lens camera sensor combination. Everybody good on this part? Great. So at this stage of the game, I am going to actually use my white balance tool. So it's the white balance, it's the little eyedropper. Right now it says as shot. I'm going to click on that eyedropper and I'm going to hover over to my screen right here. Now you might think that you could actually hit this little gray target like it is right now, but I'm going to suggest that you zoom in on this some, because one of the other tricks about this is that if you click just one point on here, it's going to pick a single pixel and it's going to do your white balance based on that. But if you click and drag an area using this eyedropper, it will take all of the pixels that are in that guy and average them together to give you a white balance. And the reason this matters is that there could be a speck of dust on that sensor. Somebody could have put a thumbprint on that sensor, on that color card. There's all sorts of things that could happen on that. You don't want it to be that precise. So I'm going to do the keyboard shortcut to zoom in on this. If you can't remember it, just go to the magnifying glass right here to zoom in. But the keyboard shortcut is spacebar command, and no matter what tool you have selected, you will get the magnifying glass with the plus in the middle. If you need to zoom back out because you zoomed in too much, you add the command key to that, or control if you're on Windows, and you will see, actually in this case it doesn't give me the negative. Oh great, Photoshop has actually changed the interface again, but nonetheless it's fine. Hold down again, spacebar command, zoom in on the color target right now, select your white balance tool, and you'll notice in my case it gets really wonky here when you use keyboard shortcuts. You can see even though I'm clicking on that eyedropper tool, I keep getting the magnifying glass. Keep selecting on that, click on it, unclick on it, click on it again. Eventually you'll get the eyedropper tool. And then in the gray patch that's just opposite the, right next to the red, this is the one that I use and that I strongly suggest you use, you can click and drag out, and you'll see it gives you a little sort of a rectangle selection. It is now going to give us the white balance of that, everything that's inside of that selection, and go ahead and say OK to that. It's just a more precise version of doing it. Or actually, it's a more averaged version of doing it. We want to lack precision. Make sense? OK, so now this has got white balance, and it's everything else has actually happened on this guy. Last thing I'm going to do right here is I'm going to hover over the white patch in this. And you can see if I'm looking at the readout in my histogram up at the very top, you'll see I'm getting an RGB readout and they're reading 235, 235, 234. Those all should be equal. That's close enough because it's a neutral gray. That part's great. I work in Capture One when I do all of these shootings. Capture One has got a slightly different processing engine than Adobe Camera Raw uses. So how many people in this room have ever developed a roll of black and white film? How many haven't? Never. Okay, you should know when you actually do film that there's hundreds of different developers that you can use that do different things. So this developer will actually give you more contrast. This developer will really protect your highlights. This developer will give you a really flat image. This developer will give you really fine grain. This developer will give you really coarse grain. There's all sorts of flavors. You need to realize that the very same thing happens with raw file developers. So what you get in Capture One is very different than what you get in Camera Raw. As a matter of fact, for any of the fashion beauty people in here, or even portrait people in here, most people will argue that the skin color that you can get in Capture One is much more pleasing and much less biased than the color that you get in Camera Raw. So a lot of people, myself included, do a lot of their initial processing in Capture One because you start off with better skin tones right off the bat. And if you're doing beauty work, you want better skin. You don't want to be fighting beauty. For me, when I look at a lot of the stuff that comes out of Capture One, Camera Raw, it tends to bias red. So anyway, just so that you know that. So when I'm looking at these numbers, because I only shoot tethered, no matter where I am, I could be on skis going down the mountain at 50 miles an hour, and I would have a computer lashed to some part of me reading the fucking numbers as I'm shooting my pictures. I can promise you that. I just don't mess with it. So at any rate, my numbers were reading actually 245, between 25 and 250, again, my target. In this case, not here, but we're going to look at other things in here. Part of the reason I wanted to pick this file to do it is I'm going to show you other tricks about the things that you should be looking for to actually develop this file out. Fair enough? Okay, so with that being said, this is good enough for me to know where I want to ultimately then do this. So my next move is that I want to apply the changes that I've made. The custom profile is all I've done, plus my white balance here. I want to apply those to the image that I'm going to actually use. To do that, hover over the thumbnail of the one that we're on right now. I'm going to zip back out just so that nobody's confused about what I'm on. So if you click on the thumbnail, don't click on the thumbnail, just hover over it, you'll get this menu that happens up at the very top. If you click on the little three dots at the top, it'll allow you to select all, and what that means is it's selecting all the thumbnails. So if you have multiple thumbnails in here, it would select them all. Then you go back to the very same drop-down menu, the three little dots on that same top thumbnail, click on the drop-down and come down to Sync Settings. And what then will happen is this dialog opens up and it says, well, what do you want to sync? And there are there are sets of presets in here of different setting groupings. So in this first one, its default doesn't really mean anything to you guys, but if we were to click on all, it would actually, you'll see that all of the things that are in here would actually be done. You can click and open these guys up. So if you click and you open up the basic panel, you can see that white balance and color temperature, where are you? I've got white balance, and the D&G profile. It's up at the very top. It's already checked, the D&G profile, the custom one that we did. Those are the only two that I've done. Those are the only two that I really needed checked. But I can go ahead and do all. The reason that you wouldn't do all is if you actually do cropping here in Camera Raw, it will then apply that exact same crop to all of your images, and that gets to be tricky because I don't know about you guys, but I don't crop all of my images exactly the same way. I do those individually. My suggestion to you is to never crop. I also don't do dust and scratches. I don't do any of that kind of stuff work in here, because that will then bake that into the file that you're ultimately going to work with. And I like to keep mine as open as I can possibly keep them open. So I only do my cropping after the fact when I'm in Photoshop and I've got a target to go to. Because for all I know, I want a horizontal of an image for my website and a vertical of my image to do a print. Make sense? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. Then I'm going to come down to my image, and you'll see now that this image has also got the custom profile in it, the one that I actually want to work with, and it's also got my custom white balance. At this stage of the game, I'm not going to go into Photoshop with this. I am going to create a D&G of this because this is going to be my new raw beginning point. Because it's got the custom white balance, but more importantly, it's got that custom profile in it. So at this stage of the game, I'm simply going to click on that same little arrow drop down and save it. The little line went across, it's done that. I'm now going to hit done. I'm not going to open any of these into Photoshop. I'm going to then go back to my Finder, and this D&G is now my beginning point, because this D&G, I can put this on anybody's computer and it will have that custom profile in it. Make sense? So I'm simply going to double click on him to start with. It's going to go into Camera Raw, and now we can look and think about other things here in Camera Raw about how to actually do this guy. So you can see it's got the profile in it, it's got my custom white balance in it, so this is the starting neutral point. I've also had conversations with a lot of people in my commercial class about this and my other classes about this as well. This has got neutral color. That does not mean that this is your final color. In your final color, you may say to yourself, I really like my images to be warmer. So you could warm your image up. You can also say, well, I like my images to be cooler. You could cool them down. Or I like my images to be much less saturated. So you can do all of those things. The reason this becomes important to us is that when you are doing compositing and you are taking 2, 3, 4, 5 images to put them together, if they don't start off with all the same color, then you are battling to get every single one of those elements color balanced to all the others. If you can do them all neutral like we just did, they all come together, they will all fit color-wise, and then once you have your composite, you can make your whole composite warmer or cooler or less saturated or whatever. But if you don't get a standard to bring them together, then you have to individually do each and every one of those, and instead of your composite taking an afternoon, your composite will take a month. and then you'll give up because it's just too frustrating. Does that make sense, everybody? So I don't want you to feel like this is the color you have to use. That's a choice that you make as an artist. Are we good on this? Okay. So there's some things that I want to investigate about this, though. And the first is I'm going to come up here and I'm going to click on the little, if you look at your histogram, there's two little icons that sit at the very top right-hand corner, top left-hand corner. If you click on those, they will actually, I'm clicked on the one that's on the highlight side, so on the right side at the very top of the histogram. It actually is a red thing, and it comes up and it flags it, and you can see that it's flagging red on this girl's hair. What that's telling me, and you can still hover over this area with your cursor, you can see that my read on my histogram is reading 255, 255, 255. It's blown out. This is now page white. Is that wrong? Does that have to have detail in it? No. Why? Why can't things blow out? Why can't things be jet black? Why can't things, this is a decision that you get to make. So I'm happy with this. I'm okay with that. I'm not going to worry about that part. This is a fashion shot. It's about these clothes. It's not about the highlight that's on the top of her head. I'm okay with that. However, what I'm not necessarily okay with, if you throw on the shadow marker here, you'll see that there are no shadows in this. The shadow marker will actually show up as blue, so there are no shadows in here. I'm sort of okay with that as well. What I'm really concerned about is not having something that goes jet black, but something that's holding shadow detail for me. We spent all of that time looking at that print to figure out what that should be. What values should your shadow detail, not your black point, but your shadow detail be? What numbers should you be looking for? Mid-20s, right? So I'm going to zoom in to her armpit area right in here. Oh, there is some black that's actually in there. And that part's good because I actually feel like you should have some in there. If you take a look in here, there's a fold that's right underneath her arm. And if you hover over this, I'm getting 15s and 13s in there. I'm okay with that. I don't think that that should have detail in it. Where I'm concerned about detail would be this area that's right up on the, so if you look at the swoop of her hair, it would be the fabric that's actually in that area. That's where I'm worried about there being shadow detail. And I'm looking at my numbers and they're reading 27, 24, 25. It's exactly where I want to be in this. So this is the kind of thing that you use to then go in and adjust your exposure or your shadows or your highlights or all of that kind of stuff. These controls are now made, you're making these based on serious numbers. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on in here? All right, so my exposure setting on this is correct. My highlights, my shadows, all of that kind of stuff here are correct. So I'm feeling good about this. So I'm simply going to open this thing as an object. This now becomes my base in here. This is where I'm actually going to start doing this work. Make sense, everybody? Okay. So then a lot of you guys went through variations of this. For me right now, the clothes that she's wearing, the shadow detail part of this is perfect. It's right where it needs to be. I'm not going to change the clothes at all. I am going to look at her face, though. So I want everybody to, again, I'm in Photoshop right now. This is no longer a raw file. This is now the baked version of that raw file. So I have less latitude to really work with, but I am going to work in here nonetheless. I'm going to hold down the space bar and the command key so I get the magnifying glass, and I'm going to zip in here to her face. And I'm going to give you guys another set of numbers, and you should actually write these numbers down as well. This applies to Caucasian skin only, and again, this is not, I'm not discriminating against this. It's just something that as a digital tech you will actually find. So it's a way to actually check your metering or your exposure when you're actually doing the capture itself. Now we already know that you can use the color card. You put in the color card. If you you do white balance, then you read the value of the white patch on that card, and if it reads between 245 and 250, then you are correct. What you will find occasionally, again, especially, I just as my experience in shooting fashion is, if people have on white t-shirts or really white, bright, like dress shirts, that kind of stuff, sometimes that white t-shirt or white dress shirt, whatever, is actually brighter than the white patch on the card. If that's the case, you don't use the white patch on the card, you use the t-shirt or the dress. That becomes your new target point because you say to yourself, I want detail in that white t-shirt. So regardless of what the white patch on the card says, you use the actual part of the image, right? However, there's another check for exposure on this, and that is, again, and assistants, all my assistants do this, all my techs do this. They'll go back and forth between the card and a highlight on Caucasian skin. So what I'm going to look for on this girl's skin is I want to find the brightest highlight on her skin. And I'm going to read that value. And this gets really specific. So again, you're either going to write this down or you're going to ignore this. But what I'm looking for in Caucasian skin in a properly exposed file is that the red channel alone, just the red channel, will read between 225 and 245. That's the range I want to work with. Now, typically for me, I'll run it at a 235. That's what I'm going to go for on the red channel. 245 will get a really bright. So if I'm actually shooting somebody who is a little bit older and they need and a lot of wrinkles and that kind of stuff, and I want to blow those out a little bit more, I know I can push that up to a 245. Also, the flip side, if I want something a little bit moodier, it's a guy and I want him a little bit more rugged, I want to really bring out the geography in his face, that kind of stuff, I'll drop that down to a 225 as well. But that's the range I play in. So if we look at where that would be on this girl, where's the highlight? Where's the lightest part of the highlight? If you look at the bridge of her nose, there's an area that's right in there for that. And if you look up at my readout on my screen right up in here, it's reading 224 in the red channel. That's all it is. You can actually put down a color sampler tool to do this. So if you go over to your tool palette on the left-hand side, it is the eyedropper tool that you want to pick. It's like the 6th or 7th one down. You'll get a flyout menu. You want to come down to the color sampler tool. This is what we were using last week to actually lay down points that don't actually move. So I'm going to hover again over this bridge part of her nose. You'll see again I've got a 3x3 average for my sample size, and I'm going to simply click on that part, and it gives me an RGB readout, and you can see that 226 is my value in here. However, I know I can push this to a 235 in that red channel, which is what I'm going to actually do right now. So I'm going to add a curve to this. To add a curve onto the layers palette, if you look at the icons that are down at the very bottom, the icon that is a circle, half black and half white, if you click on that, you'll get a flyout menu, and you can come up and just say, I want to add a curve to this. Now, a lot of people, when they do curve work in Photoshop, simply come right here to the middle, click, and start to drag up. That's not as targeted as I would actually like this to be. So I'm going to tear this point off, and instead, I'm going to use the targeting adjustment tool. That is the little hand that sits right in the properties panel that's got an arrow that points up and down. If you click on that and then hover over this spot that I've picked, you will see there's a point that's sitting right on my curve right now. It knows where this value is. I'm simply going to click on that and push up. And you can see in my readout right here, I'm at a 231. I'm actually going to go to my arrow keys to get this up to a 235. Now, this is a very subtle change. I'm going to double click on my hand to zip all the way back out, and you can turn your curve on and off by simply looking at it. But I personally like this better. It's blowing out a little bit more of her hair. I don't care about that. It's brightening this thing up. It gives her face and her skin more energy. It's just, for me, from a fashion point of view, this is the look that I'm going for. Not that the other one was wrong, but this one is more correct. Okay, you're not going to see this on the video. You will hear this on the video, but you're not going to see this. But I need everybody to look at this board back here. How do we then figure out, is our color correct on this? Did we go through color numbers before? I feel like we did in this class. Color values, what Caucasian skin should be, African American skin should be, okay. So unfortunately in this, there's no really good way of doing this in using RGB values. We use CMYK values. This actually comes out of the whole I know I've mentioned this before. The people who do drum scans, they are like they're a cult and a tribe all their own. They only deal in CMYK color correction. Nobody in their right mind wants to do that. This comes from them. The reason this is important is that we need K. K has got to be separated out of this for these numbers to work, because K is, a lot of people don't realize this part, but the skin, if you take the skin color of Caucasians and African Americans, the balance of RGB is almost identical. The thing, or CMY, not RGB, sorry, CMY, the thing that changes is K. So we can use these numbers for both. Asian skin tends to vary slightly depending on whether you're talking about sort of like more Chinese, Japanese, Korean, or Indian, East Indian, that kind of stuff. All of this depends. So these numbers in general will work across the board pretty much for any race. It just K becomes more of a player in all of that. So anyway, this is basically the way we deal with this. So again, this is something you're going to want to write down and have, or shoot a picture of it. So when we're talking about doing color balance, we're going to start with C, M, Y, and K. I'll go ahead and make a list of it just like this. M will always equal M. M is our base number and the one that we do all our calculations based on. So I just M equals M. It doesn't really change. If it changes when we do a slight adjustment, we might change to actually take it back. But it's the ratios between these is what we care about. C equals, let's see if I can get a darker marker. Yeah. C equals 1/3 to 1/5 M. Again, all our ratios are going to be referencing M. Y equals M to M plus 50% M. Don't worry, these numbers are going to make sense in a second. If it is Caucasian skin, K should equal 0. If it is what we would call Asian skin, if you think of like Chinese, Japanese, that kind of stuff, which tends to be lighter, pretty much like Caucasian, but has a greater content of yellow in it, that's where you get this M to 50%, M plus 50%. That's kind of that range. K is when you start getting into African American skin. It'll start to bump up. And you know African American skin has this huge range of tone. You can be extremely light to extremely dark and everywhere in between, whatever. That is controlled by K. So this just starts to come up here. These numbers pretty much stay the same for everybody. Does this make sense? Okay, so what I'm going to do is show you how I would actually sample this. When you do these samplings, you don't want to then pick the spot like I've picked right here. It's way too light on this. We need a really general color of her skin. So I'm going to zip in here and take a look at this. And so the thing about it, and that you should know about here too, is that makeup can fuck this up. Makeup can fuck that up. So we tend to typically, you stay away from her cheekbones. You would not want to deal with this area right here. It's got makeup on it. I can see it. That will give you a perverted color. You also don't want to go after deep shadows, like the shadow that's on the back here of her jawline. You wouldn't want to go after that. I would probably even avoid the shadow underneath her neck. I'm going to actually pick a spot that's right up here, kind of like on her forehead. It's not the super highlighty part. It's just kind of a general color in here. This is actually where I'm going to actually pick, and I'm actually going to throw down a color sampler there as well. So I'm going to do my second color sampler, and I'm simply going to drop it right here in the middle. You'll see that I get an RGB readout here of, well, it's an RGB readout. I need my numbers to be in CMY. So if you click on the drop-down menu, the little dropper that's right underneath the number 2 right here, in this, you can actually pick any readout that you want, and I want to pick out, I want to say, I want to see this in CMYK color. And when I do that, you can actually see on the curve that I'm on right now, it's giving me my before and after readouts right here. It's actually showing me that I've got 16% cyan, 39% magenta, and 47% yellow, and 0% K right now. This is also telling me an indication right here, because if I turn this thing off, you can see I've got a 2% value in K. This is Caucasian skin. That K should not exist. So my push in this to actually make that spot lighter, to go to that 235 instead of that 226 in there for the highlight on your skin tone, was also reaffirmed by this exactly, because it got rid of that K value that I was trying to get. It zeroed this 2% out to 0, so my K is correct. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, I'm not sure I can see this from all the way back there, so somebody might be able to have to read this out to me. I'm just going to start with where I'm at right now. M in this projector sucks. It's horrible.
I can't even read the percentages from here.
I think,
Barely read it still.
hang on one second here.
So what is that? Might as well not be made of a
Hang on, let's see if we can't change that.
You look at that worse over time. I don't think it used to be this bad. It looks so like crunchy.
Is that any better?
I think, what does that say?
Oh no, it's horrible.
47, 30.
All right, I'm going to see if we can't fix this during the break as well. So, sorry. This is like a new projector, I think, because it never was this bad before. All right, sorry about that. All right. Anyways, apparently, well, it doesn't suck, at least on the video recordings, I hope. So anyway, all right, so back to this. So anyway, my M right here is 39. I'm just going to round it to 40 because it makes the math easier. So if I take a look at my calculations right back here, it'll tell me everything that I know that I want this to be. So I'm going to do the new version here, C, M, Y, and K. K equals 0, I already know that. M equals 40. Again, I'm just going to make my math easier. C is 1/3 to 1/5 of it. So if I divide 40 by 5, I get 8. And I can have anywhere up to 1/3 of that. 3 into 40 is now 13. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on here? Again, 1/3 to 1/5. 1/5 of 40, divide 40 by 5, it's 8. Divide 40 by 3, the 1/3 part in here, it's 13. It's 13 and change, but 13 for all practical purposes. And then Y should equal 40. It should be the same thing as M, all the way up to 40 plus 50% of that. Half of 40 is 20, so it would be my range in here would be all the way up to 60. Does this make sense? So these are my target numbers here, and I can go in and change these. This is how you do color correction without calibrating your monitors, but I wouldn't trust that because everybody believes what they see more than what they read. But anyway, I will read you the numbers that you can't read up here. So my C in here should be 8 to 13. It's actually a 16, so I'm going to drop my C down a little bit. My magenta is my magenta. That doesn't change. And then my yellow in here is running from 40 to 60. Mine is a 47, so I'm really close in here. So to finally finesse this at the end, I'm going to go into, I'm going to use the very same curve that I got. You could add another curve if you want to. That part doesn't matter which one you do here. This will still work. I'm going to use my drop-down menu to go to the red channel. So again, in my properties panel here in the drop-down, when we're doing our work, if you don't do the drop-down at all, it affects all 3 channels exactly the same. So that's why you get, it's lighter, it's darker, that part doesn't change. I'm going to go down to my red channel right here. And in the red channel, again, I'm still going to use my targeting adjustment tool, the little hand with the arrow that points up and down. I'm going to click on this. You'll see it puts a point on the red channel for me. And again, I need more red to get rid of cyan. Red is the opposite of cyan. So as you start to increase red, you're decreasing cyan. So if you click on this and start to push up, you can see that I can actually get to 13 right there. So now I am getting a readout of 13, 41, and 46. This is exactly in my range. This is now color corrected. If we, again, this is an uncalibrated monitor that you're looking at, the uncalibrated projector. So the color may not be pleasing to you or right to you, but when I'm looking at my screen right here, because my screen is calibrated, it kicks. and I take a look at the difference here, and I think, okay, well, this part looks great. And so I'm off to the races, and I'm good to go here. I'm going to double click on the hand to get rid of these points that are down here, because they're extremely, they're annoying to be able to see them. Command H, remember, hide will hide extras, so that's all you needed to do. Command H brings them back again if you want to bring them back. If you want to get rid of them, go to that eyedropper tool, color sampler tool, and you will see that at the very top, right next to the sample size, there's a button that says Clear All. Simply click on Clear All and it will get rid of them. So this is where I begin my image right now. And so that's where I'm going to actually proceed from this. I am going to actually tweak this. I'm going to do another version of this, but let me ask everybody this part right here. So everybody typically does this when they first start processing these files. Is they look at the background right now and they say, okay, the background's really light, I'm going to process it, I'm going to make the background dark. Or they look at the figure and they say, oh, her hair's really too blown out, whatever, I'm going to make it darker. I mean, that's kind of the move it's a knee-jerk reaction to this, right? And that shouldn't be your knee-jerk reaction. Your reaction should be, what are we really trying to achieve here? What do I really want to see here? So if you take everything that's at an extreme and you push it towards the middle, what you're doing is you're just killing contrast in your whole image. You're making everything flat. You're trying to drive everything to those middle grays. That's not necessarily the best move to make. When I look at this, I say to myself, well, I really want this figure to separate from the background. If I make the figure darker, if I make the background darker, it's only getting closer to the color of her outfit, and that's not going to work for me. I want separation here. I want somebody to look at this and just see this outfit like explode off of it, because this, again, it's my image as a fashion photographer. This was the intent. Make sense? So, really quickly, I'm going to go back and select the bottom of my image right here. I'm going to just do a really down and dirty selection. We're going to use the quick selection tool. Well, actually, let's see what select subject does. If you pick on any of your selection tools, you should get a select subject that actually comes up in your options menu bar. If you don't get it there, if you click on the select menu and drop down, you can also do a subject select right there. Let's see how good subject selection does. Why not? And it does a fair job of it. We're going to get into better selections later on, but it does a fair job of this. So this is actually my subject. I don't want to impact the subject. I want to impact the background. But I can do both. The first thing I'm going to do, because it took me so long to select this subject, I'm going to come up to the select menu, and I'm going to come down, and I'm going to save this selection, and I'm going to call it subject. And I'm going to say OK to that. Then I'm going to invert the selection. I'm not inverting the image, I'm inverting the selection. So again, up to the select menu down to inverse. And now you'll notice you have the same marching ants around the figure, but you've got a whole other set that are going around the background. This is telling you that it's the background that is selected, not the subject. So I'm going to save this selection as well. Up to the select menu, down to save selection and call it background. In the select menu. I'll show you. Right here. Select menu, inverse. Right? Again, you don't want to do Command I invert, because that inverts your image. That would actually take this and make her dark outfit light and make her red skin cyanic, and that's not what you want to do. We're inverting the selection. If you hit Command D to deselect, you'll no longer have to worry about that. If you scroll to the bottom of your channels palette, you will see two. They call these alpha channels. You'll see two at the very bottom. One of them has got a black background with a white figure that's called subject. That means, because if I load this thing and use it, it will actually allow me to change the subject but protect the background. Again, remember in masking, white reveals, black conceals, right? If I load the other one, the background version, again, the figure is black, the background is white, so any changes that I make will be applied to the background, but the figure itself will be protected from that. Make sense? We good on this part? Okay, so I said I want to lighten up the background. I'm going to make a copy of my smart object right here. However, I've built in this color. This color curve is actually a part of this. you can do what are called nested smart objects, because I don't want to, even though the curve, this shouldn't be a problem for me, I want to go ahead and build this in. So select your curve as well. So I've got both of these selected, and I'm going to convert this to a smart object. So up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, and convert to smart object. And you'll see now I've got both of them all in one. So again, this is going to be difficult for you people who are still using tabbed behavior, but if you want to see what just happened, if you double click on this smart object, it will open up another image completely. This is what is inside that protective envelope. And you can see it's the smart object raw file and the curve. I'll show you. I am going to get rid of it first. I'm just going to go back in history before I did that. So I will go back in history. So basically, I just have the smart object that has got the raw data in it. If I double click on the raw data, I'm double clicked on it, it opens up, it shows me the raw data. I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. If I hold down the Shift key and select both of these, I can put them in together into the same smart object. So again, they're both selected now, and I'm going up to my layer menu, down to smart objects, and convert to a smart object. So all I've done is nested one smart object into another. It's now two envelopes. Make sense? Okay. I'm not going to work this way because I want to show you something else first. I just wanted you guys to realize that that part can actually happen, especially when we get into working with transparency and that kind of stuff. This becomes a big player. Yes?
How do you get rid of the color sampler, like the check?
So again, go back to the color sampler tool and come up and they'll clear all. Okay, so I'm going to go back in history to undo that part. I just wanted everybody to know that that actually exists as a possibility. So back in history to undo that part. So I've still got my smart object and the curve above it. That part's fine. I need to make a copy of the smart object so that I can control just the background. So to do that, up to the layer menu, again, make sure that smart object is selected on the base layer, up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, down to new smart object via copy. Everybody got this part right who actually did these assignments, and thank you for doing that. You may be the first class where everybody figured this part out. So now I've got an independent copy of that. I'm going to drag this up on top of my layer right here on top of the curve because I don't want this to impact my background. This is going to be for the background only. I'm going to then double click on this smart object to actually open it up. And the problem that you run into when you're doing this parametric dodge and burning is that I can make this darker or lighter. In my case, I want to make it lighter. You can do all of those tricks. But I can't see my original smart object when I do it, but we can balance after the fact. So I'm going to make this lighter. I'm going to grab it, and I'm trying to see how far can I really push this before I feel like it blows out too much. In my case, I've added a stop and a half of exposure on here, but even if I go to 2 stops over here, so you can crank it up to 2 stops over, you'll see how this is too light, but you'll see how I'm going to adjust this in just a second. So typically, I will overdrive this to a point. This may be a little too much, but I think if I show you the extreme, then it'll make sense to you. I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that because it is a smart object. If it's wrong, I can always go back in here and I can actually change that. However, it's been applied to my entire image. I only want this to happen to the background. So if I look at my channels palette at the very bottom, I can actually load just the background as a selection. To do that, do not click on the channel. Everybody does this. They come in there and they click on it, and then you're fucked. This is not going to help you. So I'm going to scroll up to the top and click on the RGB composite. Instead, hover over the thumbnail. Do not pick the channel. Hover over the thumbnail, hold down your Command key or Control key in Windows, click. That loads this as a selection. Then back over in my layers palette with that very, very, very super light version selected, I can actually add a layer mask. It is the icon at the bottom that is a rectangle with a circle in the middle. If you click on that, it adds it as a layer mask. And now I've actually got something I can work with. And wouldn't you say that this girl is silhouetted quite a bit? Yes, you would. Now, if you say, well, okay, but you blew the background out too much, I could say, well, I don't really think I did blow the background out too much, but there's nothing that stops you from changing the opacity of this layer. If you look at the top of your layers palette, there's an opacity slider. Again, a lot of people will use this little drop-down menu and then change it. I just use the scrubby slider. If you hover your cursor over the word opacity, you get a hand with arrows pointing right and left. If you click and drag to the left, you'll notice that your opacity goes down. And I can fine-tune this. I can now see this in real time. I can see it in the composite with my background layer. And I can dial this in, and I'm getting a lot of bang for my buck. I'm still holding my background detail when I'm at about 54% opacity in here. And this would be my final image. Questions? Are we good on this part? Okie dokie. I've got 221 right now. We're going to call it 220. Hard break, guys. If you could be back at 2:30, we will jump back in. We got a lot to do today. Have you guys gotten tired of me saying we got a lot to do today?